G'day mate, 40 here. So I recently went to a briefing conducted by two former FBI agents, and there was just a quiet confidence and an effectiveness and a demeanor that commanded your respect from these two former FBI officials. And I also saw the same thing in J.D. Vance's debate performance last night. There was a competence, a demeanor, an assuredness that just commanded respect. I cannot think of a superior Republican debate performance. Right, this is the greatest one that I've ever seen. He just absolutely wiped the floor with Tim Walz, who did get better in the second hour. And I cringed for J.D. Vance when he was pushed to answer, did Donald Trump lose the 2020 election? And due to Donald Trump's ego and his inability to accept that he lost the 2020 election, J.D. Vance was put in a very tight spot, and he did the best that he could. There was something I learned in economics, and it's a Latin phrase that means there's no accounting for taste. And so microeconomics in particular as a discipline does not use the answer, people are crazy. And I don't like that answer either when trying to understand how the world works. It's just too easy. Now, there is an exception. You can say that people are crazy when they are dramatically, profoundly operating against their self-interest, such as by behaving like a schizophrenic in public. Right, that's crazy. But overwhelmingly, I don't like the use of crazy to dismiss choices and arguments that don't accord with mine, that are not part of my hero system. It's just taking the easy way out. And so abortion was brought up yet again. So I don't believe that, did the debate moderators bring up China last night? Not much attention paid to our greatest adversary, right? None in any of the three debates this cycle. And yes, the moderators were absurd, right? They committed to not fact-checking, but they did fact-check against J.D. Vance. And the way that they would frame their questions, right, to try to help out Tim Walz and to put J.D. Vance on the defensive as much as possible, the moderators were disgusting. So CBS conducted a fair presidential debate between Trump and Biden June 27th, but ABC was disgusting. CBS was not as disgusting. Norah O'Donnell was okay, but Margaret Brennan was awful. So why would Republicans accept debates set up by these major networks that will promise not to engage in fact-checking but then do, and then frame their questions in ways to do as much damage as possible to Republicans? Now, J.D. Vance also benefited from his frequent exposure to hostile media. Right, you get better. There was one time that I was thrown. I had lunch with a journalist who I didn't know, and as we were eating lunch, he just starts hammering me, and I did not respond effectively. And I've never forgotten that. I allowed myself to get flustered. And I went on to become friends with the journalist, but I was off my game, right, more than any other interview that I've ever received. And you learn from that. And J.D. Vance is so good on his feet, and he's so used to dealing with questions that come from a different hero system to his own. While the phrase used about Tim Walz in this national campaign is he's been kept in bubble wrap. He's been kept largely outside of national media questioning, let alone hostile questioning from anyone who might be centrist to right wing. So, taking the side that people who disagree with you are crazy, I don't think is an impressive rhetorical or intellectual perspective. And what J.D. Vance did on the issue of abortion, which is significantly hurting Republicans, is to say that we have failed as a party to address this issue. Right? That is effective framing. Right? If you're getting consistently clobbered on an issue, and it's not an issue that you can run from, right? You can't give up your unpopular perspective to instead say that we as a party have failed. That is much more impressive, right? That just had the ring of truth. I would think that at least 25% of Republicans watching the debate last night wish that J.D. Vance was at the top of the ticket. He was just so much more impressive than Donald Trump. He was disciplined, he was focused, he kept making strong arguments against Kamala Harris's record. He didn't rise to the bait. He was generous, he was warm, he was empathic, he was collegial, he was reassuring. I mean, J.D. Vance has got to come out of this debate like a rock star among Republicans. I mean, this has got to shoot him to close to the top of the ticket for the 2028 Republican nomination. And it's really good for the morale of your team when your candidate is disciplined and focused and takes the time to learn what he's talking about. I mean, Donald Trump was rambling, defensive in his debate with Kamala Harris, just taking the debate. Donald Trump has never taken debate preparation seriously. He's not disciplined and focused. Now, in both the 2016 and 2020 campaigns, Trump closed fairly well. Particularly in 2016, he was very much on message. Right, very much maintained message discipline at the end of the 2016 campaign, and he won. Less so in the 2020 campaign, and he just barely lost. But Trump could learn so much from J.D. Vance's disciplined, empathic, courteous approach. And instead of saying that people are crazy, right, when you're losing on an issue, accept the reality of what's going on, that you're not polling well in response to a particular issue, that your opponents have been consistently scoring on you, that your views are consistently rejected by a majority of the American public. All right? Wisdom begins with accepting that reality. Where am I going? I'm walking around Westwood. The mediators were appalling. Yeah, J.D. Vance did hold his own. J.D. Vance, right, showed what you can do even when the moderators are against you. Right? The key is to decode the premise of the hostile questions being asked against you. Right? So the premise of much of the questioning from liberal news media and from last night's debate is that we need more government intervention, more government regulation, more government policies, more big government legislation, more big government subsidies, more big government programs, more of a nanny state. We need the government intervening in the childcare market. It's ridiculous that national candidates are being asked about childcare policy. Right? You shouldn't have children if you don't have the means to look after your children. It's ridiculous that we're expecting schools to feed kids. Right? If a parent cannot afford $1 to prepare a meal, breakfast for their kids, or to give them a couple of protein bars for lunch, right? That's pathetic parenting. Maybe people should have to get a license before they can legally have kids. right? We just inject every 14-year-old girl with Depo-Provera. I think that's birth control that lasts about 5 years, and automatically renew it unless they can establish themselves to be solid, responsible citizens. And then when people have earned the right and the privilege of having children, right, then we can allow the Depo-Provera to go out of effectiveness. So if this election is fought on issues like childcare, the Democrats are going to win. All right, they are the mummy party, the nurturing party, the nanny state party. All right, not much of a difference between the word mother and smother. And so I like how J.D. Vance made the point that some women, after they give birth, they want to get back to work. And then other women want to spend time with their kids. Now, I don't get it when men take family leave to look after their kids. I don't have kids, so call me out of touch. But looking should be primarily the domain of mothers. And the man should get out there and earn a living so that the wife can stay home and look after the kids. But now we have all this sexual egalitarian legislation that men and women both get family leave after they have kids. Right, that should be something between a person and their employer. Right, some big businesses can accommodate family leave, and other smaller businesses are not going to be able to. And I see good sides and downsides about family leave policy. I'm not just a capitalist. I am a capitalist, but I recognize that there are competing perspectives. American workers do have the fewest rights of any workers in a first world country, and there are many advantages in that. Right, you have a more flexible, dynamic labor market in the United States. We have the hardest working, most productive economy of any major first world country, to the best of my knowledge. I mean, the Japanese workforce is only about 60% as productive as the American workforce. And Americans work far more hours than almost any other first world country. And Americans have more material prosperity per capita than any other first world country, because of our largely unregulated labor markets. And instead of providing subsidies for childcare and subsidies for family leave and legislation for family leave, right? Maybe if we had a smaller size government, we could allow people to keep more of their income, and then they can choose how they want to spend it, whether on taking leave from work or on looking after their kids. So I think J.D. Vance did a great job showing empathy for his vastly outmatched opponent, Tim Walz, and reaching across the aisle saying that I think we could work together on this issue. I think millions of Americans were pleased by the return of civility in a presidential debate. Now, when you think about a value like civility or telling the truth, right, it's a wonderful thing, but values always exist in a constellation. Right, they always compete with other values. So civility is not the number one value that must outweigh all other values. But it's a nice thing to have. Fairness is a great value. It's probably the number one value in Australia and New Zealand. But there are other values too that must compete. Truth is a great value, right? And sometimes telling the truth, such as Joe Biden is senile, is more important than being civil. Sometimes civility blunts people's ability to speak the truth. And whatever happened to Joe Biden and his incapacity for office. I mean, the man is plainly checked out. We have this major war developing in the Middle East, and our commander-in-chief is senile. That's not a good thing. Now, it's probably not going to be disastrous because you have a system of government whereby aides are going to pick up the slack, and if necessary, they could force Joe Biden to do what's necessary. But why has the news media lost interest in the obvious fact that our chief executive is incapable of the demands of his office? You would think that with Iran's ballistic missile attack on Israel, Israel invading Lebanon, now Israel readying for a massive retaliation on Iran, that China and Russia are supporting Iran, we've got a war in Europe, the news media would pay more attention that the President of the United States is incapacitated. The President of the United States is senile. The President of the United States is checked out. The President of the United States is confused, demented, just clearly unfit for office. You'd think that would be a bigger news story, and it would be if you were a Republican, right? If the President of the United States right now was Donald Trump and he was displaying the mental incapacity shown by Joe Biden day in and day out, right? It would be the number one story in the news. But because the news media is dominantly liberal and they desperately want Kamala Harris to win, right? Why is there no questioning of Kamala Harris and the way that she has protected Joe Biden's obvious incapacity for office? Right? Isn't it Kamala Harris's responsibility to invoke the 25th Amendment in these situations? Joe Biden was showing clear signs of senility back in 2018. And so when it just became blindingly obviously June 27 that Joe Biden was senile and incapable of exercising the office of President of the United States, then the news media turned on him with a fury, not because in and of itself it's dangerous to the United States to have a chief executive who is senile, but because they feared that Donald Trump would win re-election. Then once they got Biden to drop out of running for re-election and Kamala Harris came in, the news media completely dropped the story. But we've got 4 more months of Joe Biden as President of the United States when he's clearly incapable of meeting the demands of that job. And the news media displays no interest in the topic. Their only interest in it was when it looked like it was going to lead to a Donald Trump victory. It's a stunning dereliction of duty by the news media. And you see the incredibly biased, just disgusting moderating done by CBS and ABC News. But last night, CBS pledged that they weren't going to fact check. And then they repeatedly fact checked J.D. Vance, but not Tim Walz. And the way they would frame their questions, they would do everything they can to tell Tim Walz what attack lines he should use against J.D. Vance. And why was abortion brought up again and childcare brought up again? And more important issues like dealing with our greatest geostrategic rival, China, not raised. Republicans would be foolish if they allow another network-hosted debate, if it's just going to be as one-sided as it was last night. But J.D. Vance was on top of it, man. He was able to understand and to decode the opposing hero systems of the moderators and of Tim Walz and of much of the audience. So he was better prepared to be able to speak their language and to parry their attacks and to understand their fears. See, not everyone has the same hero system, right? The hero system of Orthodox Jews is different from the hero system of Orthodox Christians or of secular humanists or of Marxists or feminists or people whose primary identity is racial. So what is a hero system? A hero system is a way of looking at the world that gives meaning to our life. Right? Our greatest fear, according to Ernest Becker, the author of The Denial of Death, is a fear that our lives don't matter. And so we seize onto a hero system to make our lives matter. So that the small acts that we do, such as if we practice religious rituals, or we affirm religious faith, or we affirm our belief in the glories of science or of secular humanism or capitalism, whatever is your hero system, right? We get to bind ourselves to some transcendent, meaning-making machine. So then we matter because we are part of something much bigger than ourselves. Looking at the chat, Israel and nutty Yahoo have been pushing for war with Iran for decades. It's nothing new. It's been Israel's desire for a long time, and all Israel has done is escalate to try and cause it. Well, I would say that a ballistic missile attack on Israel by Iran certainly escalated. Joe Biden has been senile since at least 2015. Okay, so certainly clear by 2018. And it's outrageous that the news media had no interest in the topic until after the June 27 debate. With all the undocumented people coming in over here, the American dream is exactly that, a dream. With these trade agreements, the corporations are shipping jobs to other countries where they can pay slave labor. It's destroying North American jobs. Yeah, but we're still having a significant amount of reshoring. Beverly Hills has been decimated and abandoned pretty rapidly. Homelessness is rampant. Many of the shops are closed. I've been mugged and stolen from. I've noticed a radical decline. I have not noticed that in Beverly Hills. So I see very few homeless in Beverly Hills. I see very few signs of decline in Beverly Hills. We don't produce anything anymore. Everything is shipped in from different countries. Jobs are disappearing. No, there's a resurgence in manufacturing in the United States. Everyone has 3 jobs. That's not a dream life in America. What is my channel about? I think my channel is about understanding different hero systems, and so decoding to the base essence of what's going on in various ideological, political, cultural, and religious disputes. So, for example, a core dispute between Judaism and Christianity is that in Judaism, what you do is more important than what you believe, while in Christianity, what you believe is more important than what you do. Right? That's a way of decoding and getting to the bottom of a difference between religions. So often what's primary in Christianity, such as invocations of faith and love and humility, secondary in Judaism, while what's primary in Judaism is secondary often in Christianity, such as the pursuit of justice and the development of law. Right? Jews become excited about invocations of law and justice. Christians become excited about invocations of faith and love and humility. So if you give a Jew a compliment, he'll say thank you and may well ask for more. Like Jews tend to have pretty good self-esteem. Jews feel good about themselves. Jews are God's chosen people. And for Christians, as John Updike noted, belief in God is kind of an either-or proposition, but for Jews, familiarity with God often breeds contempt. So Christianity teaches about God through systematic theology. Judaism teaches about God through stories. So I try to decode and get to the bottom of different ways of looking at life that result in disputes between people and ideologies and cultures and religions. I grew up a Seventh-day Adventist and in Australia, and so when you were complimented in that atmosphere, you didn't usually embrace the compliment, you played it down. Right? Seventh-day Adventism is not a culture where you boast about your accomplishments. But in Jewish life, if you've done great things, right? You're not afraid to take credit for doing great things. If people recognize you for the good things that you've done, you welcome that recognition. While in Protestant Christianity, there's much more of an ethos of, oh, I'm a big sinner, and I'm only saved by the grace of God. Or in Jewish life, the focus is much less on what you believe, and instead it's on what you do. So from a Jewish perspective, Protestant life seems fake with all its invocations. I'm a big sinner, I'm only saved by the grace of God. While from a Christian, Jewish life seems carnal and entirely centered on this earth and lacking spirituality. And spiritual highs are much more difficult to find in Judaism compared to Christianity and other religions, because it's the least romantic religion, right? It's almost entirely focused on this world, and it's focused on your behavior, and there aren't the easy spiritual highs that you're often offered in other religions, right? In Christianity, you're encouraged to come to God like a little child, right? You won't find anything in 3,000 years of Judaism encouraging you to come to God like a little child. So in 8th grade, I decided I wanted to be a journalist. And so I'm fascinated by how journalism works. And in the 1980s, liberals would outnumber conservatives among working journalists by ratio about 4-1, though in the elite media, it was closer to 8-1 to 10-1. Just as among elite academics, right, you'll have a disproportionate number of Jews, but in less elite academic institutions, right, you'll have a lot more Roman Catholics, say particularly in fields like history, economics. Now, the ideological divide in journalism has become more and more pronounced. So now it's about 20-1 liberals compared to conservatives among leading journalists. And there's very little news media for the working class. So you had the development in the 1960s of the New York Review of Books and New York Magazine, which are aimed at the elite. And mainstream journalism, the big newspapers, used to cover the concerns of the working class, but the economics of news has sharply shifted upmarket. So there's more and more of a fight to capture the attention of people earning well into six figures. And there's not much of an economic model, apparently, for appealing to the working class. And this is where Fox News swooped in. They saw that there was a lot of money to be made creating a news channel that primarily appealed to the working class. So doctors, lawyers, dentists, academics, executives are going to watch CNN and MSNBC when they seek out news. And truck drivers and plumbers, independent businessmen, and the working class are much more likely to seek out Fox News and talk radio. You can just let that run in the background. I've become increasingly impressed by Megyn Kelly's show. She turns out a compelling show on a regular basis with skeleton staff. Right, she has something like 6 producers. And it's a great show. And she gets higher ratings than a lot of cable news shows. And she has phenomenal guests. I mean, last night she had Rich Lowry, the editor of National Review, on, and the editor of the Washington Free Beacon. Right, those were her 2 first guests discussing the vice presidential debate. And Megyn Kelly has a long background in TV news, and she just ripped apart Margaret Brennan at CBS and ripped apart the CBS moderated moderation of the debate last night with pinpoint accuracy. So Megyn Kelly has a legal background, and lawyers are trained in verbal dexterity and in making arguments. Legal cases are essentially developing one narrative, and then the other side tries to knock down your narrative and build up their narrative. And so lawyers tend to be particularly skilled at making arguments, and Megyn Kelly has that legal background. She's quite skilled. Now, 15 years ago, there were rumors about her having an affair with Brit Hume, who was her mentor at Fox News. But Megyn Kelly looks great. She is at ease with what she does. She's happy with what she does. And it's just a compelling show. It's fun to listen to. It's fun to watch. And she's so hardworking that when there's breaking news, such as after the second Trump assassination, right, Megyn Kelly goes live. After a presidential debate, Megyn Kelly goes live. In addition to her regular weekday shows. So she's working hard, and she just puts out a compelling show. I mean, it's fun to listen to. And she brings in great guests. She brought in Mark Halperin in the morning show with Sean Spicer, and then the Democratic political strategist. I'm impressed with the quality of the guests, the quality of the show, the quality of her points and questions. Now, Megyn Kelly is center right, and I am somewhat right wing. So part of it, is that we share a similar hero system. But it's fun, it's high energy, it's focused. And then Mark Halperin's show is also just a must listen, right? He does the morning show at 6 a.m. West Coast time, 9 a.m. East Coast time. And he'll often come back in the afternoon and evening. And he was a longtime political director at ABC News. And it's just a must listen if you're closely following American politics. The only difference between the left wing and the right wing is the propaganda each side is exposed to. Left versus right is a false dichotomy, facade meant to divide. Chat says, I've seen 11 Old Testament predictions about Jesus' birth and death. Well, Christian scholars who are being honest will tell you that there's nothing in the Hebrew Bible that predicts Jesus. I was interested in Judaism. I heard there's forbidden text. How can someone shield from others the word of God? Well, it's not really forbidden text. It's that Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, is not meant, it's not designed, it's not encouraged to be studied until you're married with kids over at the age of 40 and already fully observant of Jewish law. Jews were exiled for not heeding the word of God, exiled, dispersed into the nations, forbidden a Jewish state, say the religions prior to Zionism. Yeah, there are hero systems that Jewish suffering is the fault of Jewish behavior, and that gets its origins in Jewish texts like the prophets, where Jews, long before there was ever Christianity or Islam, they would interpret their suffering in terms of, this is our fault, we've let God down, we haven't done what's expected. So that admirable level of self-criticism that Jews have displayed is then being used against them by their enemies. Now, under the influence of faith and desire, you can take any text and read back into it, oh, this is predicting Jesus. There's nothing intrinsically in the text of the Hebrew Bible that it has anything to do with Jesus. But if your theological desire is strong enough, you can read back into it. So polls still tight in the battleground states, but Republicans seem to be increasingly confident, and Democrats much less so. I think that's telling. My biggest question is how effective and competent is the Republican ground game? We know that the Democratic ground game is superb. They're really good at turning out their voters, getting them to the polls. Not much mail-in voting so far, so it's dramatically down from 2020. Study Harry Potter, it's more interesting. I tried to read Harry Potter, but couldn't hold my attention. I don't read that much fiction.